Look around. Do you notice it? That sense of not belonging, of standing at the edge of every conversation, wondering why the people around you so eagerly play the same insipid social games. You think there must be a reason for this emptiness, but let me tell you right now, it isn't because you're flawed. It's because you, unlike most, have dared to see the cracks in the system. Society loves to whisper, fit in, smile, nod, show up, don't cause trouble. And you've listened for a long time, haven't you? You've nodded along with jokes that don't amuse you, endured endless conversations that deplete your spirit, and you've done it because you've been trained to believe that fitting in is the only way to survive. But there's a voice inside you, a raw, uncompromising voice that asks, why? Arthur Schopenhauer, the so-called philosopher of pessimism, declared that most humans walk around half asleep, so enthralled by illusions of acceptance that they fail to question who or what they're seeking approval from. If you feel out of place, it's because you're starting to wake up. You stand on the threshold, peering into the farce that everyone else calls normal life. But guess what? That farce doesn't care about you. It doesn't want you to question it. It wants you to comply. Every day that you submit to this collective masquerade, you betray that inner voice warning you, everything here is hollow, and you sense the hollowness, like a faint taste of ash in your mouth, every time you fake a smile. You're not wrong to feel uncomfortable. The truth is, you're beginning to see that belonging at all costs might just be the biggest con job of all time. Here's your first wake-up call. If you consistently feel out of place, if your mind is screaming that the conversations swirling around you are built on superficial niceties rather than genuine connection, then you are standing at the brink of a much-needed revolution within yourself. The only question is whether you have the guts to follow that instinct. That is your moment of self-realization, a brutal, painful, exhilarating jolt. You might think you're alone in this feeling, or worse, that there's something defective about you. Let me spit out the truth. It's not you, it's them. The smarter, sharper, more perceptive you are, the less this world makes sense. You see people wearing masks so thick they've forgotten what their real face looks like. You hear courtesy drenched in hidden agendas, politeness overshadowed by greed or envy. This is the battlefield, your mind locked against the unspoken rules of a civilized society. Nietzsche once slammed the comfort-seeking masses, saying they cling to herd mentalities to avoid the dread of real freedom. In your case, you perceive the illusions. You see that the ever-smiling, always chattering crowd is running on autopilot, performing ritual after ritual to maintain an illusion of unity. Do you think it's a coincidence you're often bored at parties, drained by small talk, and exasperated by casual acquaintances? No, it's because real intelligence cannot stomach the stale bread of shallow conversation. This friction between your mind and the farce is not about you being antisocial. It's about you being awake enough to detect the stench of inauthenticity. Every time you nod along to a pointless remark, you feel a spark of betrayal inside you. That's the cost of false acceptance, the daily, systematic self-sabotage of hiding your true thoughts and ambitions just to keep the peace. The more aware you become, the less tolerable these mundane interactions are, because your intellect demands substance. And society? Society wants you numb. It wants your eyes closed, your mouth shut, except to spew polite pleasantries, your mind docile. Recognize it for the war it is, the conflict between your intelligence, which seeks clarity, and the social machine, which thrives on illusions. But wait, you protest. Humans are social creatures. Isn't connection the path to happiness? Certainly, that's what you've been told. From the moment you were old enough to imitate your parents, you were bombarded with the message, belong or suffer. Yet consider Schopenhauer's uncompromising stance. Solitude is the fate of all great minds. You want to resist that, don't you? Because you've been trained to believe that if you're alone, you're punished. you're less than, you're unloved. Society idolizes the charismatic extrovert, the person with a million friends. Never mind that those so-called friends might be as hollow as driftwood. But solitude isn't the condemnation you've been led to think it is. Yes, at first, it feels like torment. The phone stops ringing. Invitations dry up. You begin to sense life stretching out before you in a quiet hush that you once feared more than death itself. But that hush becomes your sanctuary. Inside it, you discover that your mind can finally breathe. You're not forced to smother your interests or camouflage your intelligence to make others feel comfortable. You can read, reflect, and refine your own thoughts in the absence of incessant noise. It's a paradox. The loneliness that initially seems like punishment becomes an almost holy privilege. You finally experience your own presence. You stop performing. You stop draining your energy in the pursuit of petty accolades from people who barely know themselves. In that solitude, you can shape your mind's raw material into something unbreakable. You stop bleeding out for superficial acceptance. Yes, it stings, but every liberated mind first bled from the wounds of isolation before those wounds transformed into scars of power. You might fear turning into some bitter, resentful misanthrope who thinks the whole human race is worthless. That's another lie society tells. The minute you step away from the group, they label you as a hater, a loner, or a negative cynic. Let's dissect that nonsense. This is not about hating humanity. This is about refusing to bend to a routine that suffocates your authentic spirit. Don't twist solitude into blind misanthropy. Solitude is clarity. It's about choosing interaction on your own terms, rather than slogging through forced gatherings and trivial small talk. It's the difference between authentic interaction and obligatory attendance. You don't owe anyone your presence just because they demand it, or because that's what people do. True intelligence doesn't beg for external validation. The moment you realize you can opt out of pointless interactions, your soul begins to expand. You see people for who they are. Some might be remarkable individuals worthy of your time. Others, they're placeholders who want you around to serve their own need for background noise. By being selective rather than hateful, you demonstrate your respect for authentic connection. In other words, you're done contaminating your life force in exchange for shallow acceptance. When people accuse you of misanthropy for choosing solitude, they're just panicking. You threaten the narrative that everyone must cling to the group. They don't understand a person who can say, "No, I'm good by myself right now." And that confusion ignites fear in them. Stay firm. This strategic withdrawal is not hatred, it's liberation. It's a sick joke, but it's also cosmic law. The minute you stop groveling for acceptance, people suddenly find you intriguing, maybe even powerful. The second you say, "I don't need your approval to exist," onlookers scramble to interpret your confidence. Because in a world obsessed with constant social feedback, your indifference is a thunderclap that shakes their illusions. You become an enigma. You aren't broadcasting your life on endless social media channels, begging for likes. You aren't forcing laughter in a circle of acquaintances. Suddenly, everyone's radar pings. Who is this person who doesn't seem to care about us? Why are they so calm, so focused, so self-reliant? The paradox is that while everyone else invests enormous energy into looking good, sounding correct, and winning fleeting applause, you're operating from a position of genuine self-assurance. You don't need them. And that, ironically, begins to draw them in. Like moths to a flame, they circle around you, half enraged that you refuse to play the approval game, half mesmerized by your freedom. This is psychological jujitsu. By rejecting the system's greatest currency, social validation, you rise above it. Machiavelli, in his astute, if ruthless, political insights, taught that power often rests in perceptions. By displaying indifference to popular applause, you shape the perception that you are self-contained and hence formidable. You flip the power dynamic. The crowd that once demanded your conformity is forced to respect your autonomy. Stop begging. Start existing on your own terms. Watch how the balance of power shifts overnight. Right now, the world is an ocean of chatter. Scroll through social media, flip on the TV, open your door. What do you hear? Noise. Endless, mind-numbing noise. Everyone's shouting opinions, craving attention. And here's the darkest secret. All that noise exists to stop you from thinking. If you never learn to endure silence, you never learn to face yourself, your flaws, your aspirations, your hidden genius. The reason silence terrifies people is because in silence, illusions die. The moment you stop filling every second of your day with trivialities, you're forced to have a conversation with your own mind. And that conversation can be excruciating if you've built your life around external validations. But you, if you're still reading this, are already different. You've recognized that the constant bombardment of media updates, the superficial banter about reality shows, and the endless loop of notifications are smokescreens. They blind you to the truth. Silence, by contrast, is a merciless mirror. It shows you the cracks in your life you've been avoiding, the dreams you've betrayed, the illusions you've coddled. Yet it also opens the door to your untapped power. Let the rest of the world shriek in unison if they must. You will learn to love the quiet, because in quiet, you solidify your purpose. You learn to stand alone, forging your thoughts until they're ironclad. This capacity to confront silence is the hallmark of truly disruptive individuals, the ones who end up rewriting the rules rather than following them. Now, you might wonder, am I just walking the path to isolation, doomed to a life of eternal loneliness? But here's the key distinction. Being alone by choice is nothing like being isolated against your will. You stand at a fork in the road. Isolation is the curse of someone who wants to be accepted but is perpetually rejected. It's a condition of desperate longing for the crowd's embrace and never receiving it. That form of loneliness is suffocating, humiliating, soul-destroying. Solitude, on the other hand, is the prized fortress of someone who sees beyond the illusions. It's a sanctuary you enter willingly, shutting the door on meaningless interactions because you refuse to degrade your mind with shallow nonsense. The masses treat these states as synonymous, but they're worlds apart. One is a prison of unfulfilled need. The other is a cathedral of inner growth. Don't confuse the two. When you walk away from an inauthentic crowd, you elevate yourself. You're not passively cast out, you're actively stepping away. That's power, not punishment. And the irony, the more you choose solitude, the less you feel lonely. Why? Because you draw in a rare breed of individual, the ones who appreciate quiet strength, who can share true depth without drowning you in trivial chatter. You might have fewer social connections, but each becomes richer, like a finely cut gem compared to a handful of cheap, cloudy stones. Rejoice in that. It's the reward of being uncompromising in a world that settles for anything. You fear being labeled strange, difficult, or impossible to handle? That label is a badge of honor. Take it from history's so-called mad geniuses. Leonardo da Vinci was consumed by his own inventions and spent days, weeks, years lost in experiments and sketches, ignoring the frivolous gatherings of high society. He channeled that solitude into a revolutionary legacy that changed art and science forever. Nietzsche. He ripped apart the moral frameworks of his time, retreated into loneliness, and wrote fiercely about the herd mentality, much to the outrage of those he exposed. If you flip through Nietzsche's works, you'll see a man wrestling with the torment of walking alone, while also reveling in the freedom it gave him to think radically. The world called them eccentric because it lacked the courage to follow. You see, revolutionaries, whether in art, philosophy, or science, recognize that you cannot produce greatness by pandering to the lowest common denominator. They spent hours, days, entire lifetimes in states of near isolation. This wasn't misanthropy, it was focus. They withdrew from the distracting carnival to unearth ideas that shaped civilizations. And what about you? Are you going to shackle yourself to a mundane social script merely to avoid the label weirdo? Or will you risk being misunderstood to create something extraordinary? The list of so-called strange geniuses extends far beyond Da Vinci and Nietzsche. Test yourself against their example. Do you want fleeting social acceptance? Or do you want to leave a mark that outlasts your mortal breath? Picture the routines of everyday social life. Birthdays, bar meetups, small talk about sports and weather, forced politeness at office parties, repetitive catchphrases repeated ad nauseum. It's like being strapped onto a treadmill that never stops, always requiring you to keep pace or risk flying off. Most people will do anything to avoid that ejection. They'd rather endure endless monotony than face solitude. This treadmill is powered by fear. You were taught early on that acceptance equals safety, so you slog along, exchanging empty pleasantries, tagging each other in photos, celebrating trivial milestones just to confirm you still belong. But ask yourself, is it even real belonging? Or is it a hamster wheel of forced interactions? From birth, you're indoctrinated with stories about the loner who fails to thrive. Rarely do they tell you about the inventor in a quiet workshop, the philosopher in a cramped study, the visionary locked away from the noise as they refine ideas that revolutionize everything. Those stories don't serve the treadmill's function. The treadmill wants foot soldiers, not renegades. If you're weary of running in place, step off. Let them call you antisocial, cold, or not a team player. In stepping off, you reclaim your time, your mental bandwidth, and your creative potential. You might limp away initially. After all, you've been running for so long. But that limp soon disappears, replaced by a new stride called independence. Don't let a contrived system devour your intellect and your life. You are meant for more than infinite loops of superficial chatter. Now, I'm not telling you to become a recluse hiding in a cave with no human contact. That's a mistake many make when they first see the hollowness of society. They assume the only solution is total disengagement. But true power isn't found in permanent retreat. It's found in mastering when and how to engage. Machiavelli, the master strategist, would advise you to be present when it serves your goals, invisible when it doesn't. That's the crucial difference. You aren't a hermit fleeing society's faults. You're a tactician who sees the big picture. You recognize that sometimes you must appear at a meeting, an event, a social circle, because doing so can further your purpose or expand your reach. But you do it on your terms, and you disappear the instant the environment turns toxic or trivial. This is the hallmark of those who move in the shadows until it's time to unleash their next big idea or seize a critical moment. If you remain perpetually absent, you won't know when opportunities arise. If you're constantly present, you're swallowed by noise. The brilliance lies in selective engagement, like a hawk that soars high above the landscape, descending only when it spots a target worth the dive. Your goal isn't to sever every tie to humanity, it's to restructure how you interact. You transform from a mindless participant into a strategic actor. You become the individual who knows how to build alliances that matter, spark conversations that lead somewhere, and escape the gravitational pull of mindless gatherings. It's not running, it's controlling the field on which you play. Do you realize how many people exist solely for the next round of clapping hands, the next click of a like button, the next pat on the back from a circle that barely cares about them? They're slaves to external validation, worshipping at a false altar that can collapse at any moment. The result? A prison of constant anxiety, because if the applause stops, they vanish into irrelevance. If your sense of self depends on how many people nod at your every word, do you even exist as a distinct individual? Or are you just a mosaic of projected desires from those around you? Let's be blunt. If you can't bear the silence of 0 notifications on your phone, if that emptiness terrifies you more than the thought of losing your own principles, then you're already shackled. And what is it all for? Approval from people who themselves might be drowning in insecurity, who might not even know who they are outside of their feeds and highlights. If you build your worth on their fleeting acceptance, your foundation is rotting. Reject that trap. Stand firm and know that if nobody claps when you speak, that doesn't negate your message. If nobody likes your photo, that doesn't erase your worth. Your existence isn't a sideshow for the easily distracted. Let the rest chase ephemeral illusions. You're going to be something different, someone whose actions stand on the bedrock of personal conviction, not the shifting sands of public endorsement. Beware, once your eyes open to the hollowness, there's no going back. And yes, that can be horrifying. The old routines you once endured, office banter, forced laughter, superficial gatherings, will become unbearable. You'll try to feign interest for the sake of social peace, but your spirit will rebel. You'll sense your own hypocrisy in every empty chuckle. This is the point of no return. It's where illusions crumble, and it's painful because you realize how much of your life was built on autopilot. But there's liberation in shattering the false. You see, the illusions were your shackles. In waking up, you also break free. Some will resent you for changing. They'll accuse you of becoming too distant, too intense. Let them. They're uncomfortable because your awakening forces them to confront their own stagnation. You cannot unsee the truth, that many human interactions revolve around maintaining illusions of closeness, illusions of interest, illusions of purpose. From this moment on, superficial gatherings make your skin crawl. You'd rather invest your time in forging something meaningful, an idea, a craft, a body of work, than drown in a tide of small talk. You'd prefer to stare at a blank wall and wander in your imagination than fake another polite smile to maintain social decorum. This transformation is irreversible. It's the forging of a stronger, more authentic self. Dare to walk that path, because the alternative is a lifetime of living a lie. So what now? Are you going to slink back into the herd, pretend you never tasted this raw truth, and return to the mechanical existence of forced social acceptance? Or are you going to bear the scorn, the isolation, and the power that comes with forging your own way? Listen carefully. There are indeed 2 categories of people in this world. The majority adapt. They figure out how to best camouflage themselves, fit in seamlessly, and avoid rocking the boat. They may find comfort, but they'll never find their most audacious potential. Their lives will be guided by the unspoken laws of the group, from birth to death, locked in a cycle of shallow belonging. Then there's the minority, those who dare to evolve. They look at the script handed to them by society and tear it up. They walk alone if they must, or they form alliances with similarly awakened minds. Their path is often steep, lonely, and riddled with conflict, but they emerge with a life that is undeniably their own. These individuals are the ones who truly move humanity forward, whether by invention, philosophy, artistry, or leadership. Which side do you choose? If you're content with the illusions, you can close this manifesto right now and run back to the comfort of your social circle. Let them pat your back, coo that everything's fine. But you'll always know the truth, that you saw the cracks and chose to ignore them. If, on the other hand, you're willing to risk everything for a genuine existence, then continue. This is your invitation to step beyond the threshold, to leave behind the stale illusions and become the architect of your own reality. Now we arrive at the final confrontation. You've discovered that social acceptance at all costs is a poison that robs you of authenticity and drains your intellect. You've glimpsed how solitary focus can become your forge, how strategic engagement can replace mindless conformity. You've heard the echoes of minds like Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Machiavelli, each one in their own era, demolishing comfortable illusions and daring to shape reality rather than be shaped by it. It's time to decide who you will be, a passive participant or a strategic master of your own life. Stop waiting for someone else's nod of approval. Stop performing for an audience that can turn on you in an instant. Every day that you beg for acceptance, you give away a piece of your mind and chain yourself to their shallow approval. That chain only grows heavier with time. The alternative is not easy, but it is glorious. You adopt the vantage point of a commander surveying the battlefield of modern life. You engage when it serves your higher purpose. You retreat into solitude when you need to sharpen your intellect, refine your vision, and protect yourself from worthless distractions. You speak only when you have something vital to say, and when you speak, your words carry the weight of a mind that does not grovel. You become a force of nature, someone who shapes opinions rather than chases them. You become the type who builds quietly in the dark until one day the world awakes to the magnitude of your creation. You don't need applause. You don't need an invitation. You don't need them to understand you. You need only one thing, the unbreakable resolve to remain true to yourself, even when the rest of humanity shrieks for your conformity. That is your final mission. This is where you either turn away or step forward. If you proceed, you'll never again be enslaved by the farce of mindless social expectations. Instead, you'll navigate society like a grand strategist, fully capable of connection, but never desperate for it, fully conscious of the illusions, but never a prisoner to them. You will be misunderstood. You will be criticized. You will at times wonder if the pain of walking alone is worth it. But the alternative, selling your authenticity for fleeting smiles and superficial nods, is a slow, grinding death of your spirit. So choose. Stand at this threshold, feel the electric burn of possibility in your veins, and make your move. Will you remain an echo in a crowd of echoes, or will you summon the courage to utter the thunderous voice that has been muted inside you? This is your moment to demolish the illusions, embrace strategic solitude, and wield the power of silence as your own unstoppable weapon. Don't wait for anyone else. Don't apologize. Don't look back. Begin. If this message resonates with you, please subscribe for future videos.